to hit. So welcome everyone to today's Knowledge Nugget. It is actually the 7th in our series in 2022, and we're delighted to hand this session over to our partners, colleagues and friends, the Innovation Network, and we will have Grant sharing his wisdom around metrics, which is a question we often get asked about. However, before I do hand over, I just wanted to remind everyone that the Idea of the Year competition is accepting your entries. So the Ideas UK run a competition every single year, and today we are delighted that this year we're back in person to celebrate the winners with a conference in Tewkesbury. But the closing date is literally next Wednesday, the 20th of July. So now really is the time to search for all those brilliant ideas that have made a true difference to your organisation and enter those into the competition. But that's all I want to say about the competition. If anyone's got any questions about it, don't hesitate to get in touch. But now over to Grant.
Amazing. Thanks, Sina. And hi, everybody. So welcome, Sam, Nick, San, Abdullah. So those of you that are just coming in for this session, you're going to need a piece of paper and a pen. So if you are like Connor, electronic is possible as well, but you'll need a tool to just create a metrics matrix. We're going to build a metrics matrix today. So please do grab a piece of paper and a pen. At the end, I'm going to ask you just to pop on your camera if possible and just share your matrix on screen. We'll get a little picture at the end. So grab a piece of paper and a pen, electronic okay too. And let's dive in. So let me just share screen. So a little bit about us for those of you that don't know us. Connor and Grant, co-founders of the Innovation Network, really helping people to harness the power of design thinking, lean startups, and Google sprints to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve, innovation, product development. And one of our flagship programs is called the School of Innovation. And in there, we've got this section on innovation metrics. So Connor, is that showing okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Amazing. So what we're going to do is just delve into the world of metrics and help you create your own metrics matrix, all in about sort of 35, 40 minutes. So my first question to you is, what brings you here today? So if you in chat can just pop down, what would you love to achieve? What would you love to get out of today's call? What would be an absolute win to end with in sort of 35, 40 minutes time? So what brings you here when it comes to innovation metrics? What's your biggest question? What would you love to get out of this session in the next sort of 35 minutes? So if you can drop that into chat, let's just take a look, and then we'll just customize today's session. So when it comes to innovation metrics, what's your biggest pain? What brings you here today? What would you love to get out of today's session?
Identify best KPIs for innovation, says Tony. Understanding ways of measuring improvements in innovation within an organization. That's from Sue. And Claire says, interested to see what people's experiences are.
Okay, amazing. Got another one there?
Yeah, and then Chris says, how to measure without distracting people from what they are trying to do. And then Lisa, she says, I chair an innovation best practices sharing network. I would like to identify metrics, measure impact of the innovation network. And then Sue says, tools for measuring innovation. Some great ones there.
Okay, amazing. So let's jump in. So there are some interesting tools out there. Some are tangible sort of measurables, and we'll talk about those. Some are more intangible. And I think what we're aiming to do today is to paint a picture of all the different things you could measure and how to create your own metrics matrix, which is, I'm going to help you to do that with a piece of paper. So if you can grab that piece of paper that you've got, fold it in half, and then fold it in half again. So you end up with 4 squares, and we're going to take a look at 4 different areas that you could use to measure if you're measuring your innovation matrix. So grab a piece of paper, fold it in half again until you end up with 4 squares. And we're going to take a look at the 4 areas that you could measure or that it's wise to measure on. And we're going to build that out as we go. All right, so let's go and take a look. So we said that there's 4 different types of innovation metrics. So the first one is productivity, which is probably the one that we're best used to measuring. which is volumes of ideas, levels of engagement, number of projects launched. So we're pretty good at measuring actionable deliverables. Then we're going to take a look at financial returns. And financial returns is quite interesting because when we first built our innovation program back in 2016, I experienced a lot of resistance from partners that we worked with about bringing numbers into it. And there's a big feeling in innovation, or from innovation practitioners, that finance and accounting block innovation. They're opposites. And in many ways, that is true. You'll be familiar with the quarterly crunch, how we've got to deliver on shareholder returns, and we've got to deliver on KPIs for this quarter, which often creates such pressure and urgency that it perhaps doesn't let us focus on things that are more important, more valuable, and for longer term innovation. But I firmly believe that you've got to be able to speak the language of the accountants, and you've got to be able to take whatever you're working with and quantify it into dollars and cents, pounds and pence, as to get, we live in the world of finance, and we've got to be able to justify the returns of what we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about financial returns. We've got a lovely little toolkit for you there. I'll tell you about that. We're then going to take a look at activities, metrics. So some of the activities that you could be doing, and that's sometimes quite interesting to look at what activities you are doing and how to measure those. And are there other things that we could bring in really to expand our innovation? And then the fourth area of metrics we'll take a look at is portfolio. So having a longer term view on the metrics that we should be measuring for sort of longer term initiatives, leapfrog technologies, new and emerging customer or user needs, and changes in our ecosystem. So it's almost like you need the matrix of these 4 blocks together, measuring each one, and then taking a look at a global perspective to really give you a handle on properly measuring and managing your innovation practice. So that's what we're going to dive into. So as we go through, if you think of something that's relevant to you, I just want you to capture it into one of those squares. So on screen, you'll want to head up each one of those blocks. So we've got a block for productivity metrics, we've got a block for financial metrics, activity mix, and portfolio health. So name each one of those 4 blocks: productivity, financial, activities, and portfolio. And then just drop me a yes in chat when you've headed up your 4 blocks. So today's session, a little bit interactive, and you're going to be writing it up with me as we go, creating your own customized metrics. So into chat, just drop us a yes when you're ready to go. You've got your piece of paper, you've headed up your 4 areas: productivity, financial, activities, and portfolio. And then we'll go and build those out. So Lisa's there, Tom's there. Give us a couple more yeses and then we'll get going. Lewis, Tony, nicely done. Claire, done. Okay, let's jump in. So the first one I always start with is financial. So I always think, even if finance is not your bag, Tony and I have been working in this sort of the mini MBA space for going on 15, 16, 17 years. And we often meet a lot of people that say, numbers is not my bag, don't talk to me about finance. I'm not a numbers person is probably the comment we get most. And we really believe that you've got to be a numbers person if you're working in innovation. So if you haven't, really worth going and doing a finance for non-financial managers course, just mastering the basics of the language and the methodologies. And we've actually got a little toolkit to share with you today that if you haven't, we'll let you dive into that. There's a full 2-day course we recorded years and years ago when I was a much younger man that will let you get into the finances. So some of the things that you might measure, and I'm going to ask you just to capture the ones into the financials block that might be relevant to what you're working on. So you could take a look at things like new revenues generated. So that could be new revenue streams, incremental revenues over and above your day-to-day revenue, but taking a look at the impact of your actions on direct revenue growth. So that's often something that's easy to quantify, easy to track, and if possible, linking that to your innovation projects. You could take a look at costs saved. So Zena, I always remember, I think it was HSBC that had that amazing system. And I know you give people in your work recommendations on systems to capture savings, efficiencies, and innovations. So quantifying every little innovation activity and how that might save costs. And when you add that up, I remember your example of pages of printing and the tens of thousands of pounds that accounts to. So often just by having a focus on these things and tracking them, Tony's favorite quote is, attention goes where metrics flow. So whatever you measure gets managed. So focusing on revenues generated, new and incremental, cost savings, and then perhaps efficiencies or returns. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We've got some stuff for that in the toolkit. So quantifying the efficiencies that you deliver with your projects and generating the return. So return simply means, what did we spend versus what did we generate? So in layman's terms, tracking what each project cost us and what returns do we get back. Quite interesting sometimes to think about tangible versus intangible. So dollars and cents is quite easy, you know, if there's a tangible gain, but sometimes those returns are intangible. So it could be the value of breaking down the silo effect, creating collaboration, creating knowledge sharing, culture change. Now, those things are sometimes at first quite difficult to turn into dollars and cents, but you can have a think about how you could quantify that. So taking an efficiency like, I don't know, so shorter meetings, more effective communication, and quantifying that. You might have a think about the salary or the hourly rate of the people involved in that team and being able to quantify those improvements. But it's often quite interesting just to have a think about quantifying those intangible improvements. So not always easy to do, but can be quite powerful. So cost savings, efficiencies, incremental revenue, return on investments, return on our assets, and I'll show you in the toolkit, we've got some extra resources on that. So into chat, can I ask?
Sorry,
Yeah,
I was going to say, can I ask a question? Because it's something interesting that I get asked quite a lot, which is around cost savings and whether they're real or not real. So when we talk about things like saving time, it is a kind of a real saving, but equally you're still paying that person's salary. So actually to the business, you haven't saved any money. How do you what's your answer to that kind of, I guess, equation and how you measure? Because as I say, that's a question we get asked quite a lot.
It's a great one, Zena. So I think it's all about return on the spend that we're making. So yes, we've got this workforce, this team, we've got fixed salary overheads, and the way to create value from that investment, that salary overhead, is really to optimize how much we're generating. So granted, like we might save some time, are we going to use that time wisely to reinvest and monetize again? But I think just creating that culture of what's the maximum return I can get for that investment generates some sustainable change over time. So yes, I could save time in a team, I could maximize efficiency, I could quantify that saving, but then there's almost like layers of the onion, right? And then with that saving, what are we going to do that's more effective? And Zena, my absolute favorite book of all time is the 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch. So Connor, perhaps you can just pop that into chat. It's an old book. I actually have a summary that perhaps we can share after the session, but Pareto's Principle, a really interesting story. Vincenzo Pareto was an Italian economist studying in London in the early 1900s, also an avid gardener, and he discovered that when he harvested his crop of peas, 80% of the harvest came from only 20% of the plants. So he thought, this is crazy, you know, this disproportional, a huge amount of the harvest from a relatively small amount of inputs. So being an economist, studying in London, I think at the LSE actually, went back and looked at money. Surprise, surprise, in his home village in Italy, 80% of the wealth was in the hands of 20% of the people. So what's that? Yes, so he coined this Pareto's Principle, which is 80% of your results come from only 20% of your inputs. And just having that 80-20 thinking can often unlock like exponential growth. So 80% of your team's results comes from 20% of their time. In any business, 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customer base. Focusing in on that 20% customer base and looking how we might improve, monetize, or make that more efficient. Looking for the 20 within the 20. So of those 20% of customers that generate 80% of your value, could you find the top 20% of those customers and optimize, grow? So we just love that 80-20 thinking. So Zena, a long answer to a short question, but in a nutshell, I think it's creating a culture of measuring and looking at optimizing, and then layers upon layers with those savings. How do we maximize that? But what I love about 80-20 is if you get comfortable with the numbers, confident about speaking the language of accountants, you can often look at your existing spend, whatever that might be, human spend, technology spend, and then thinking, how might we optimize this? What's the 20% that we could focus on that if we just improve that would give us exponentially more value? Some little examples that we've seen students do. One of our students came on a course and he was in project management, so like constant firefighting, constant chaos. So he decided that he would make the first hour of their day a power hour. So this is quite extreme, but it gave quite extreme results. So first hour of the day, his team prior to the pandemic in a physical office would hand their mobile phones to a frontline receptionist. Someone would take messages. You turned off your emails, so no email, no mobile phones for the first hour of the day, and you just focused on planning. Now, quite extreme. He went to the extent that you might get a written warning if you checked your email or used your mobile phone in this first hour. Obviously, emergencies excluded, you know, so someone at the front line would come to you if something was on fire, literally or figuratively. But what he found was by creating that hour of solitude, his team's productivity was exponentially more. Their projects ran better, they saved money, they became more creative, they became more effective, and suddenly the firefighting was less. How he split that hour was first 45 minutes focused on planning, last 15 minutes focused on a team meeting and alignment, and then jumping back into the chaos and firefighting, mobile phones, email, and all of that. So just that 1 hour a day of a productive system, a culture change, generated a monetized saving in terms of less firefighting, less expenses, better use of time, better planning, better use of resources, just by a cultural change linked to the numbers. So Zena, is that, I don't know if that's helpful. Amazing. So long story short, if you're not a numbers person, you've got to become a numbers person to be able to interrogate the numbers, look for those savings, and justify the budgets and changes and projects that you want to do. And we have a little gift for you today. So Connor will pop this link into chat. We've got a finance toolkit. In the finance toolkit is a whole series of DVDs when I was a much younger man, but it's a 2-day finance for non-financial managers training course split into little video chunks. I think the only place that still sells is in Dubai. So Zena, if you're walking through Dubai Mall, when you're there in October, you might hear Grant's voice hammering on about net present value, cash flow, but all of those videos are there for you to take and use, and a whole lot of other resources. So Claire, that's the link to the finance toolkit. Well worth, if you're in the innovation space, boosting your financial literacy. So talking about the numbers. All right, so very quickly, any thoughts, ideas that you want to add to the financial metrics square in your metrics block? So anything inspire you there, anything you want to go and take a look at, and really great comment from Zena about not just looking at the numbers, but looking at the intangibles, how you measure those, and how could you monetize the optimization that you do. So anything that inspired you there, jump that into your finance metrics block, and then we'll move on. All right, nicely done. And then please do jump into the finance toolkit. Lots of lovely tools and techniques for there. Oh yeah, the 80-20 is amazing. Claire, if it's not there, I'll pop the 80-20 book into the toolkit. I have like top 5 books of all time, and 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch is my favorite. So very quickly, Richard Koch invented the Filofax. I don't know if any of you ever remember owning a Filofax diary. So Connor, because you're the youngest person on my screen, I'll tell you this crazy story. Zena, your dad, and I used to have these things called Filofax diaries, and they were high-tech, leather exterior, paper insides, and it was a paper-based diary. So Richard Koch invented the Filofax, wrote these books about the 80-20 principle, and he actually sails around the world in his private yacht. 4 months in London, 4 months in the south of Spain, 4 months in Cape Town, where he owns a little seafood restaurant. That's really great if you're ever in Cape Town. And he wrote this book about maximizing your value using the 80-20 principle. He's got 5 books in the series now. He knew that 80% of his money would come from 20% of the people, so his books are really expensive. I think like 25 pounds for a book, but they're absolutely worth their weight in gold. And Connor's put the link into chat, but I do have the summary, Claire. I'll pop into the toolkit. So really great about thinking, where do you focus your limited resources for maximum value, and the thinking that comes with that. All right, good. So those are cool things. Let's go and take a look at productivity metrics now. So generally, in the innovation space, we're good at measuring productivity. So ideas generated, engagement levels, project launch, they're tangible, they're measurable, and they're volumes-based. So generally, we're pretty good at measuring those. Some things to think about is a KPI in isolation can, if not be dangerous, sometimes be misleading. So we have a lot of clients that are really pleased that they generated, I don't know, 1,000 ideas or a whole lot of brainstorming techniques, but possibly don't measure the productivity further on. So going from volume of ideas filtered through to perhaps a desktop business case, filtered through to perhaps pitching to the executive team or pitching to a quarterly panel, through to actual implementation. So when it comes to productivity, what we would really suggest there is, over and above measuring your productivity metrics, linking them together to the outcome that you desire. So is it, and linking that to company strategy. So if the company strategy is revenue growth, optimization, new technologies, new areas, aligning those productivity metrics to your strategy goals for the year, and then making sure that they do dovetail and integrate. So if you're doing brainstorming or ideation once a quarter, what's happening to those outputs? Where are they going? How effective are we at generating tangible returns? Even projects, right? So how many projects do we run in a year? If we did a sort of project post-mortem, what was the real value created by those projects? And in many cases, I think sometimes we commit resources to a project before doing the right design thinking, the right focus on the right pain. So sometimes we're spending money doing activity without necessarily aligning on the tangible outcomes that we were going to measure. And are they really driving us to our strategic goals? So capture into that block on productivity. And what are some of the productivity metrics that you currently use? Are those aligned to where you really want to go? And are they integrated and dovetailed? So are they tracking like the full innovation cycle from idea through to innovation and tangible deliverable, be that dollars and cents finance or improvements? So have a think about that. Anyone got any questions or comments on productivity? And again, Claire, really great comments. The 80-20 book links to this as well. So it's quite a sobering thought. So in the 80-20 principle, he wrote another book called the 80-20 individual, which says 80% of your results comes from 20% of your workday. So if you think about it, we're all working 8, 10, 12 hours a day, probably more so now that we're hybrid and virtual, right? Because we're answering emails at midnight and working when the kids are asleep. So we work these long hours, but actually if you take a look at it, chances are 80% of the value that you create in a day comes from an hour or two. And for most of us, that's generally true. We're really, really busy working long hours, but how much of our time is spent on actual value or creating like real, tangible, most productive value? So interesting one to think about there. Excuse me. All right, let's head on to the next one, which is activities. So now we get to the fun bits. So we're used to productivity matrix, we're used to financial metrics. Now we're going to take a look at some of the things that should be in your activities mix. So this block is all about measuring the different type of innovation activities that you're doing. Many, many small bets. So chances are we're doing some of these things, but are we measuring what we're doing, and are there gaps for future things that we could add to create value? So some of the activities that you might be doing, and I'm going to ask you into chat just to drop a note when you see one that you are doing. So is anyone doing trend scouting? So trend scouting might be dedicated time each month or year to jump online and just go and take a look at what's happening in your industry. This might be physical, so going to global events, Mobile World Congresses, Fashion Week, whatever that might be, and going and taking a look at in your industry, what trends are emerging. Either doing that with structured desktop internet research or visiting sort of global centers of excellence, global conferences, global events, and just going a look and seeing what trends are coming out. And Connor and I have put together our favorite tools for trend scouting. We'll share with you later on. So trend scouting is an interesting one, just going a look and seeing what's coming out of the industry, what's changing. Co-creation is an interesting one. So what are you co-creating? Yeah, horizon scanning, Sue. So horizon scanning could go across a couple of these things, I think. So for me, horizon scanning would link to activities and portfolio, but it's a nice concept, that visual thing of scanning the horizon, keeping a tab on what's coming. Yeah, so calling it horizon scanning, nice one, Chris, as well. And we'll pick that up. In fact, we might do something at the end about horizon scanning. But what I love about this is it's linking metrics to the horizon scan. So keeping track of all of this, but quantifying it. So what are we doing? What are we generating? And are we tracking that? So from trend scouting, we could have a metric of how are we evaluating those trends? How are we bringing them into another level of the business to explore? So rather than just like a ton of information overload, quantifying how we will manage those inputs. And Claire, that we've got our favorite trends report I will share with you, but super, super interesting and thought-provoking. I'll see if your one is the same. Otherwise, share with us a link. Excuse me one sec. But I guess that's the trick, right? Is if we're just doing the activities, horizon scanning, trend reports, without having a metric, it's an activity, but are we harnessing the most value from that activity? So from all the trend scanning, what was the 80-20? What's the 20% that could be a game changer for what we're doing? Where's that going to feed into? How are we going to measure what we're going to do with that? Co-creation is really interesting. We see many of our clients doing co-creation with customers, with staff and employees. So we actually run a fair amount of mini sprints where clients will bring together customers, vendors or suppliers and staff from within their organization and work on an industry challenge and build something in as little as 3 hours to a day. So Nick says co-creation is increasingly used in the NHS with patients to change services. Really, really powerful. So using your stakeholders, your vendor ecosystem and your users or customers to create new innovations with you. And you can do that in as little as an hour to 3 hours. So it's fascinating with the power of a Google Sprint, what you can do. So Sue's co-creating with service users and partners. It's a really great activity. And do ping us if you want some help. We've got some processes like an hour to 3 hours. You can bring together a group of users, anything from 5 to 500, put them into groups and co-create new propositions really, really, really interestingly. Connor and I have taken 150 CEOs in 3 hours, co-created new propositions, all sorts of interesting stuff, very, very powerful. So co-creation is an interesting metric to monitor. And then again, monitoring those outputs. Excuse me. Incubation is an interesting one. So taking some of those concepts that you might have generated internally from co-creation, from startups that you work with, from ideas within your own organization and incubating that. So incubation has different meanings depending on the sector that you work with. But in essence, it's creating a physical or virtual space where you can grow or farm those ideas and incubate them into something larger. So many, many multinationals have got incubators, tech labs, skunk works, all sorts of stuff to incubate new ideas, concepts, and see if you can turn them to something with traction. So if you're not, have a think about what you can do with incubation, and that doesn't need to be a big expensive space. It could literally be virtual ideas incubation, but some sort of methods to grow that. And there's lots of good stuff out there. Zena will have a ton of interesting case studies about this and the work from Ideas UK. Open innovation is an interesting one to measure. So are you doing some stuff in terms of open innovation? You would see this a lot in the financial sector where we release concepts out to a wide audience. I see Facebook is doing something now, or Meta, turning the AI software into something open source to grow and harness innovation. So putting a challenge out into a space and letting people work on it, competitors, customers, suppliers, users, harnessing a whole open ecosystem, putting that out there and seeing what could grow for the benefit of the industry that you could ultimately take back and create value for your organization. So again, something that you might want to be measuring. The concept of scale up, spin out, spin in is an interesting one. And all we talk about with those activities is, could you take something innovative and create a startup environment where you could scale that up? And we're seeing a lot of multinationals do this. There's a UK insurance company that takes interesting propositions. I saw the latest one was on-demand insurance for learner drivers. So an app-based proposition where a learner driver that doesn't have a vehicle of their own can get on-demand insurance for whoever's car they're borrowing their aunt or their mother's car, switching on insurance for that, doing their driver's lessons and switching it off again. So that's a concept that wouldn't fit into a traditional large corporate, but is a really interesting proposition. If you take a look, the UK has got millions of students, millions of learner drivers, turning that into some sort of incubation and seeing how you might scale that idea up. So having some sort of method, physical or virtual, to scale up ideas and see if they turn into something with traction. Spinning those out into separate businesses once you get enough volume. So sometimes there's value in taking something out of your core business and spinning that into a separate company, perhaps with a cash and human resource lifeline. So often these things have got 3 to 12 months of resources to go and see if you could turn that into a real startup business, not constrained by perhaps the corporate challenges that you might have in your parent company. And then sometimes spinning that back in. So Tony and I work a lot in the telecom space. Singtel is really famous for creating a data security, cyber security startup, scaling that up internally and spinning that out into a really, really profitable organization that used to account for a significant part of their revenue. And then recently, a year or two ago, spinning that back into the parent organization. So the activities mix is really just a matrix for thinking about all the things that you could be doing. Some of those you probably are doing, some of them you may want to do, and creating some sort of measurement for that. So attention goes wherever metrics flow. So whatever gets measured gets managed. So it's literally creating a matrix of the things that you want to focus on, creating some sort of measurement so that you're measuring all these activities, covering all the bases that you need, and then having some way to feed that back into the value that you create. So anyone done anything interesting with activities? Want to pop a note into chat? Had an experience about that? So trend scouting, co-creation, incubation, open innovation, scale up, spin in, spin out. It's really, what I get from this process is thinking about all the things that we could do, deciding which ones we will do, think 80-20, and then creating some sort of measurement. Where in many organizations, these things are happening. They're happening in isolation, in silos. We're doing activities, but perhaps not being as strategic as we could be about it. Cool, let's see, any thoughts coming through there? Any questions or comments? Yeah, so Claire, that's a great one. People going outwards for ideas. And absolutely, Claire, I think what we find is that there's a lot of great stuff happening in our organizations that perhaps just needs alignment, a little bit of measurement, some sort of metrics to make sure that we focus on it, appreciate it, and harness it. And Zena says, we've got to talk on this topic at the Ideas UK conference. So amazing. Really great to get some focus on this. So let's take a look at the last block. Oh, here we go. This is from Connor and my toolkit. Connor will post these into chat as well. These are just our favorite trend watching, trend spotting websites. Oh yeah, the Trend Hunter research report is absolutely awesome reading. So springwise.com, trendhunter.com, and The Hustle. I just love, one of my favorite parts of the day is reading The Hustle's daily newsletter. There's often little quirky things like who owns the smiley face. Did you know that there's a family that owns the emoji smiley face rights from a French patent way back when, and that's worth £500 million now. So I just love The Hustle, but Trend Hunter is amazing. And the Trend 2022 Trend Report research, Claire, is awesome reading. Definitely going to give you some inspiration to put into your metrics matrix. So really, really great. So that's in the chat. So a little bonus there. Let's go and take a look at portfolio metrics. So we've done activity, we've done productivity, we've looked at the numbers. And now it's quite interesting to go and look at your innovation portfolio and take a look at breaking down your portfolio into short, medium, and long-term programs. And this is quite interesting because it lets you start to think about things that are on the horizon, could affect you, but don't make sense to commit a lot of resource to now. So for most of us, we've got some concerns or opportunities that we could harness around things like blockchain, AI, big data. So we know these things are out there. For some of you, that's part of your day-to-day. For others, it's on the horizon. We know it could be disruptive or provide an opportunity, but too much, right? Too overwhelming. And what the portfolio health metrics let you do is quantify that, have it on your horizon, something to look at, something to measure that may feed into something more immediate later on. So having some metrics around what are you doing to look at your customers and your users. So are there any emerging needs from your current customers or users? Are there any completely new user groups that are opening up with completely new opportunities or needs? So these are things that we might ask ourselves a couple of times a year, but are we measuring and quantifying and turning into some sort of metric? So they take something that's on our horizon, on our mind, and let us just quantify that in whichever way is relevant for you. So there's no rules about what this needs to be, but you might have a metric about the number of customers that you serve and their value. Are there any trends coming out of those customer groups? Are there any new opportunities on the horizon? And just quantifying that as an industry and as an organization. So again, just having those numbers handy on a matrix lets it keep top of mind, so it's not something that we need to focus on daily, but there could be a massive innovation challenge or opportunity looming that we just want to keep a handle on. Next, it's interesting to have some metrics around emerging technologies. So which new technologies could change your current competitive landscape or create a completely new marketplace or opportunity? And I think this holds true for all of us, right? So there's constantly new technologies coming out, AI, big data, crypto, blockchain, on the horizon. Interesting things are happening, but how are we tracking, quantifying and prioritizing those technologies? So for most of our customers, they have this on the horizon, they have this on their mind, they know that they need to think about it, but very tough to do that in the day-to-day. They might have a hackathon once a month, so probably not once a month, once a quarter or once a year, but is that learning quantified and brought back into the organization, back into our innovation strategy? So again, what gets measured gets managed, having that on the horizon. And then finally, the ecosystem. So what new business models will be required to take advantage of shifts? And our favorite one is businessmodelnavigator.com. In our 5-day School of Innovation, we spend a good half day just on business models, business model innovation, and the transformative value that you can create with business model innovation. So we absolutely love delving into that and tracking what's changing in the industry, what business models from other industries could we cut and paste into ours. And in half a day, you can get some fantastic insights and often a whole new proposition, if not a whole new division of the business, just from managing and tracking ecosystems and business models. So really, really interesting, again, to have that in some sort of metric on the horizon. Anyone got anything cool that you've done in terms of customers, technologies, and ecosystems? So I like to think of this as many, many small bets. So mapping out these matrices into many, many small bets. Each year, you've got a limited amount of resource in terms of human capital and budget capital. Where are you going to place those bets this year? Have we decided that? Can we measure it? And can we track what we're doing in that space? So we've got an aligned sort of measurement of where's the most value we can create. And the 80-20 lens is a great way to look at this whole matrix. So where is the 80% of the results coming from? Where could we focus our efforts? Literally 20% of our investment will generate 80% of the results. And the $1 million or $1 trillion question is, where do you focus? What's the 20% that will give you the most value? So I hope that's useful. These are two books that we really love. So Innovation Accounting from Dan Tomer and Esther Gans is a really great guide to measuring your innovation ecosystem. So well worth a read if you're really into innovation accounting. And then John Durr's Measure What Matters, Google OKRs. And we actually have a whole course on implementing Google OKRs in your organization. So if you're interested, please do reach out for a coffee. Both great books. So we just wanted to share with you a free seat on our next School of Innovation program. So once a month in London or virtual, we run this 5-day program, innovation metrics, innovation accounting, build a business case in 30 minutes. We bring together design thinking, lean startup, and agile all together. So we really feel like that's what makes us special, is bringing together the lean startup philosophy, agile, numbers, productivity, and design thinking all into a 5-day program. And we do have a seat on that course to give away today. So any questions, any comments, and then we'll give away the free seats on the School of Innovation September running.
Thanks, Grant. I think that was great, and actually lots of food for thought. I love the kind of using metrics to identify really where you're placing your bets, if you like, and how you're going to kind of maximize that 20% to get your 80% return. So I think that was really super, really great explanation. Had a message from Sue before she left to say, really good job, really interesting. So yeah, fabulous.
And Zena, it's a great comment. I was at a talk by Alec Osterwalder, and he was saying how many projects it takes Nestle to create a new growth engine, $1 billion revenue stream. And that's quite fascinating. Anyone want to put a note in chat? How many projects do you think Nestle has to run to unlock $1 billion product? Chris, nice one. That's great. Give me a number, any number. How many projects do you think Nestle has to run to create their next $1 billion product range? Yeah, Claire, it's a good guess. It's 265. So, which I think is quite low, right? Because if you think about, so 265 projects to discover their next $1 billion revenue stream, which speaks to the many bets, right? Whereas if you told your boss, I'm going to run 260 projects, they'd be like, no way, we've got capacity for perhaps 10 or 20. Of those 260, probably 2/3 are going to be neutral to loss making. 1/3 might be a little bit of return, and one will be $1 billion growth engine. It really speaks to having many bets, measuring those, and then finding that 1 out of 265 for growth.
That's a far better return on investment than things like open source then, because some of those figures are like 10,000 to 1.
Yeah, so I think it's just because if you think about Nestle, they've got this traction, existing projects, existing momentum. I think that number is way higher for other organizations. Oh, sorry, guys, hold on one sec. So room service. Chris, I don't know if that was you or who made that comment, but I reckon that number for other organizations is exponentially higher than 265, which means more bets needed.
Yeah, Nestle must have a really good ecosystem to get it down to that.
Exactly.
That for that return. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Good. And that, my friends, is that. Finance toolkit, our favorite trends. We hope that's useful. And then Connor, how are we going to decide the lucky winner of School of Innovation September running?
Yeah, so I've actually already put all of your names into a random generator. So the winner of today's one is Lewis Hodson. So Lewis Hodson, I'm going to put my email into the chat, and if you can email me, we'll get you onboarded onto the course in September. Exciting stuff. So congratulations, Lewis. And I'll put my email into the chat now.
Amazing. And Lewis seems quite excited, so that's great.
Yeah, awesome, Lewis. We look forward to seeing you.
Fantastic prize. Thank you again. There you go,
Lewis. I almost didn't make it.
It's all about the metrics, Lewis. Attendance gives ROI. Yeah.
So Lewis, if you can contact Connor direct, he's just dropped his email in, that would be fantastic. And thank you, Grant and Connor, for running today. Really insightful. I think there's loads for everyone to take away. As I say, a topic that I think we all struggle to get to grips with slightly. I think that has offered some really great insight. So thank you so much. And we now take a break from our knowledge nuggets for August, but we'll be back in September when we're tackling another tricky topic, and we have some IP and patent specialists in the September slot. So that'll be on Tuesday, the 13th of September, and it's all about protecting your ideas. So do tune in for that one. I'll send details shortly. But for today, thank you very much. And remember, the Idea of the Year competition last week for entry. So do get those entries in. But thanks again, Grant and Connor.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Brilliant.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Nice to see you. Bye-bye.